It is my pleasure to introduce the speaker for today, Professor Aida Villanueva. Aida Villanueva is an assistant professor in the Department of Sociology at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and her research examines the intersection of gender, inequality, family labor, and women's employment in Latin America and also in the United States. In her research, Professor Villanueva takes a cross-national comparative approach to explore women's work and the reproduction of gender disadvantage in labor markets. And her portfolio can be organized into three different themes: family labor, precarious employment, and household structure. So join me in welcoming Professor Villanueva.
Thank you so much. Well, first, thank you all. Thank you, Pilar, Emilio, and all of you for being here. This is an honor and, of course, a pleasure. Can you hear me okay? Behind? Yes? Well, so today we will discuss with you this study on motherhood pay gaps in Latin America. This is a study with a focus on trying to understand the potential role, the role of labor informality for understanding pay gaps due to motherhood in the Latin American region. And this is collaborative work. I conducted this study with Penn, who was my mentor, or he's my mentor, at UT Austin, a wonderful individual. This is a project in my last few years at UT Austin. However, a lot of what I do is informed for the time I put into this project, and actually any comment you may have will be welcome, because I keep thinking about this study and what it came to, what brought to my agenda. So I started this project because I do believe that the framework of motherhood penalties is very useful. It's very useful for understanding disadvantages that women face in the labor markets, and it has been useful to move the discussion forward since this framework came to be about 20 years ago now. We have learned so much, and I think it has moved the discussion forward from gender pay gaps to a more nuanced understanding of what happens to women in the labor markets. And indeed, we have learned substantially. We have learned a lot in the past 2 decades about the association between motherhood and employment for women, obviously. For instance, we know a lot about variation by key aspects such as occupation, position in the income distribution, and we also have learned a lot about substantial cross-national variation. Oh, I should have a timer.
I can tell you.
Okay. I have my clock ready. Thank you. And we know about substantial cross-national variation in the size and even the presence of these motherhood pay gaps. These are not universal, homogeneous across all societies. I come from UMass Amherst, so I am fortunate to work with some of these people who produced work that informed this line of research. We also know this is research largely focused on wealthy countries, which is normal. And understandably, we may suspect that institutional factors that play a role at shaping motherhood disadvantages are not universal. They are not universal even among wealthy societies. Likely, they are not the same factors at play in non-wealthy countries. So informal work. I have always been interested in women and work, and in Latin America, well, I'm Peruvian, and we are actually used to see each other, to look at each other. When I started becoming familiar with this line of research, my first thought was, how would this work in our countries? How would this framework work? And the main point is that in cross-national research that has identified this substantial variation in the presence and magnitude of motherhood penalties in wealthy countries, A key factor that researchers examined was that of family-friendly policies or family-related policies, which makes a lot of sense, of course. It was examined in terms of family-friendly policies, family-related policies, predicting the shape of motherhood pay gaps. For non-wealthy countries, what we have is a strong shortcomings in the capacity of states to enforce policies in general. When I started working with this project, I remember showing people a table with regulations connected to motherhood for the countries that I work with, and they look closer to Europe. I mean, things would be fantastic if we could assume that the law applies, but that is not the case. In non-wealthy countries, middle-income countries, even informal work is typically conceptualized as a key defining factor of labor markets. What are we talking about? These are jobs not registered, not covered by labor markets regulations or protections. We call them different names depending on the setting. They are highly prevalent, not only in low-income countries, but also in middle-income countries. About 50% of the population in Latin America as a whole is considered to be in the informal labor. These are jobs that are not protected against unemployment shocks, health shocks. Under the table, we call them sometimes. In black, we call them sometimes. Indeed, they are associated, as we can imagine, with unfavorable labor conditions, clearly. But they are also associated with more flexible work arrangements. And that's key for the importance that I believe why informal labor is important for our conversation about women and work in Latin America. So low-paid jobs, as you can imagine, they are all overwhelmingly informal, but informal jobs are not only concentrated on low-income workers. For instance, in the countries that I addressed in this study, the percentage of women in professional and managerial occupations in the informal sector ranges from 5% in Chile to 30% in Mexico. So we have a sizable proportion of working women, advantaged working women, also working in the informal sector, meaning that with jobs that are unregistered in one way or another. So this is a map, yeah. So you get an idea with shades of blue designing the rates of labor informality in the Latin American region. This study includes some of the countries with the highest prevalence of labor informality, such as Mexico and Peru. Mexico above 66%. These rates are way higher now after COVID in most of these countries. And it also includes Chile, that traditionally has one of the lowest rates of labor informality in the Latin American region, by then around 18%. I picked data from this place, CEDLAC, from the Universidad de La Plata in Argentina. They do this fantastic work of monitoring informal labor using different data sources for all Latin American and Caribbean countries. What else I have in my notes? Yes. And also because I use the definition provided by CEDLAC. It's not an outlier of a definition. Let's go to that now. In Latin America, I would say that among scholars on labor, informal labor is a little bit of an obsession. We talk a lot about informal labor. We have institutions monitoring informal labor, often surveys designed to importantly monitor informal labor, and a scholarship, a rich scholarship that has not only tracked but addressed what shapes informal labor, the different conditions that produce that make possible for workers to move from informal to formal labor. We have paid a lot of attention to informal labor, and this is not new. It's since I remember, people have talked about informal labor in the Latin American region as a whole. And yet, interestingly enough, there is not that much research on addressing women.
One question.
Yes.
Does this definition include women who are unpaid workers in family farms or enterprises?
That's a great question. No. No, and I wish it did. I thought a lot about it because I'm Peruvian. We call them typically zero-income workers in family firms. And in Peru, this is a not negligible group of women. But trying to address conceptually labor compensation when people don't receive actual pay for work, it's kind of complicated. And also what I did, we're going to talk more about it, and I will be happy to answer questions, but I excluded rural settings from analysis because in all these countries, rural settings are drastically different than urban settings, and that's something that we often do. We either concentrate on urban areas or rural areas. Yes.
But I think in Chile, if you use the definition of participation in the Social Security system as a definition of formal worker, you get much more than 18% who are informal workers if you included all workers. You exclude a bunch of them because they're just working on family farms and family enterprises.
Yes, if they are unpaid. If they are paid, they are there. But if they are unpaid, yes, they are excluded. And if they are rural, they are excluded as well. And if they are well, we're going to talk about sample restrictions in a little bit. But that's a great question. It's actually also in the limitations of this study. So I was mentioning, it always caught my attention. I always have been interested in work, and I'm a sociologist, and I am a Peruvian. I have been very familiar with the work doing in informal labor. It always caught my attention how we had so few studies addressing women. When we quantitative work, typically researchers restrict samples to only men, address only men. And yet informal work is gendered. It's clearly gendered. So let's talk a little bit about it. Women and mothers are overrepresented in the informal sector. We know this. This is descriptive statistics. We know this. Regardless of the definition we use, they are overrepresented in the informal sector. And this is associated with women, and especially mothers, need for flexibility. Formal jobs are better, full stop. In all these settings, we can all say safely, formal jobs tend to be better jobs than informal jobs. At the same time, they often require these all or nothing arrangements. Women report, and we have qualitative evidence on this, women discuss how they have no chance to take a day off if their child is sick, how if any sort of accommodation is almost impossible, so they sort to the choice of looking for jobs in the informal sector with which they can accommodate family-related responsibilities.
So is overrepresented a value judgment, or are you just saying they are more than 50% of them?
Among working women?
Yeah, no, I'm just saying overrepresented suggests there's some right representation. To me.
That's interesting. No, I was referring that we have a higher proportion than expected, yes. Yes. So mothers look for options in informal labor because they don't have the chance for a job in the formal labor with which they can combine family-related obligations, which means that benefits of the formal labor are tied to the gender distribution of unpaid responsibilities. I have seen qualitative work addressing this matter, women reporting. They reporting in general things that affect how they look for jobs. And those include children and the need for taking care of children and how a good job wouldn't allow them to take a day off or move their schedules. And in the language of gender and work, we call this constrained decision making, right? This is a choice, quote unquote, but it's not a choice. No, with this very constrained set of possibilities, women opt choice for a job in the informal sector. So these are analytical samples that we use for this study, and here we can see mothers and non-mothers by country, and rates of employment in the informal sector. So, for instance, for Peru, among mothers, we have around 55% of working mothers in the informal sector. Among non-mothers, we have around 41% of mothers in the informal sector. Taking an informal job is more consequential for women than men, so that's another point of consideration. The pay gap for informality is larger for women than men, and to me, the most clear example would be when we look at these countries and the most common occupation by country within the informal sector for women is domestic labor, for men is construction. And we can see the difference between these two types of jobs, no? Which job pays more?
So does non-mothers only mean you've never given birth, or if you're 55 and your youngest child is 18, are you a non-mother?
Hopefully not. No, actually not.
I mean, just what's the definition?
Yes. So this is actually my analytical sample. In my analytical sample, because I work with cross-sectional data, I restrict the sample to women who are 25 to 40, precisely to avoid, we will always have some women, but to avoid a big proportion of women who are mothers, but we don't observe them as mothers because the child has left me. It does make sense. Yeah. Then, once in the formal sector, women are less likely to move to formal jobs. Yes?
Sorry, I don't know much about Latin America.
No, please.
So, can you tell us what are families like? Like, are their husbands working full time? Who are these women who have to, as mothers, who have to go and work in the informal sector, obviously to, you know, help the household? Are their husbands also working, or are there, you know, anything about what they do? Are they in the informal sector, or?
I was just discussing how I did so many extra analysis for this paper. I think so. If we analyze the likelihood of men, and specifically fathers, to join the informal sector, fathers are less likely than non-fathers to join the informal sector. So the opposite. So typically, men, if they are fathers, they are less likely to be in the informal sector. If that makes sense. There are some studies, I'm remembering one, for, I think it was Chile, but I can bring you the specific reference later on. But it was about, and I think it goes in the expected direction. If you have a couple and the husband has a job in the formal sector, the woman is more likely to have a job in the informal sector. No? So insurance for social protections at the household level. Does that make sense? Yes. So once in the formal sector, women are less likely to move to formal work, which to me resonates with the notion of what are these jobs. You know, jobs in the formal sector for women tend to be more isolating than that for men. So transitions to better jobs are more difficult. We believe that given the need for flexibility that we have discussed a bit ago, mothers' decision to take a job in the informal sector takes place before the specific job they take. Motherhood happens, they find little possibility to take one of all these all or nothing arrangements, they opt for the informal sector, and then they go for specific jobs or occupations. Further, we believe transitions to the informal sector are more significant, well, this is connected to the point before, for women's trajectories than specific occupations and specific job-related characteristics. These are not good jobs in general. So being in the informal sector is more consequential. The countries that are in this study, we work with Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Mexico, and Peru. I'll talk a little bit about this. This is about 67% of the Latin American population taken together. They are all middle-income countries at this point in history. And we can say that these countries, at this point in history, show certain similarities. I would say more a convergence. No? And let's show an example about that. I like to show infant mortality rates like a snapshot of the quality of living in a specific setting. And this is over time from 1985 to 2015. And these are all the countries in the study. So what you can see is a convergence. No? Above, it must be Peru and Mexico, and rates are looking closer and closer. And still, we see a substantial difference here. If I show you TFRs, no, rates of births, if I show you age at first birth, we would have a similar story of convergence. At the same time, they are different. These countries offer some important variation. I have just shown you rates of informality ranging from 18 in Chile to about 66% in Mexico. Substantial, and we have just said labor informality is a key characteristic shaping these labor markets, and this is very different. This looks very different across these countries, and these are just rates of poverty with one peaked measure. No, and again we see substantial variation ranging from 2% in Chile with this specific. Oh, this is 3.10. 3.10. That was wishful. No, $3.10. $3.10. From 2% to a high of 9% in Peru, 11% in Chile. No, so substantial variation in the working conditions. There are also substantial variations in the rates of female labor force participation across these countries. So yes, we see convergence, but also we see important differences. Yes.
So this is 3.10 per worker, per family,
per day, per person, per day, per person per day.
Per person, including 3-year-olds. People
Yes,
including 3-year-olds.
Everybody. It's a calculation of everybody, if I remember correctly.
So it's at the family level in some sense, right?
It's just the amount of dollars measured at parity by 2015, if I remember correctly. So whether at the person level we have $3.10 or more. Yes. So a lot of variation there. Other rates, well, we know that poverty rates are typically measured at the country level, no? So those rates are not comparable. So the study goals. We wanted to assess the presence and magnitude of motherhood pay gaps in Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Mexico, and Peru, all these countries, and as well assess the impact of labor informality on the motherhood pay gap. Those are the overall study goals. And here is pertinent to discuss a little bit of total effect of motherhood versus a net effect of motherhood, because this is connected with limitations of our study and the kind of data that we have at hand. The paper that I like the most explaining, and I think in a more informative, clear way, this matter is that from England from 2016. So we can think about a total effect of motherhood. The total effect of motherhood defined as controlling only for factors that we can say are plausibly exogenous to motherhood. Let's say educational attainment, region, age, plausibly exogenous to motherhood. That is, that penalty, the total penalty, includes the effect of mechanisms, includes the effect of occupation, sorting into part-time jobs, right? Meaning includes, is not cleaned off, it includes the effect of factors in the causal pathway between motherhood and low wages, sorting into low-paying occupations, part-time jobs, etc. We are addressing this penalty, a total effect. And this has, I'll explain the reasons. On the other hand, we can definitely conceptualize a net effect of motherhood that controls for these factors that are plausibly endogenous. No? And mainly, this is about work experience, total work experience. So if we have data that allows us to measure total work experience of women, we can control for that and take that effect out. And this informs, a net effect would inform us whether motherhood affects wages even among those with the same work experience, for instance. Here we, as I said, we are addressing a total effect, and we are saying that informal labor, we are proposing it as playing a more salient role than occupations. We say it happens before motherhood, informal labor, and then occupations, jobs, specific jobs. Importantly, so why we concentrate on a total effect? We believe it's important, we believe it's informative, and also we have data limitations. We have cross-sectional data for all these countries, and therefore we cannot account for, in particular, work experience. Make sense?
So you verbally mentioned education, but I didn't see it on your slide. How's education treated?
Education is controlled for. Because we, yes, because...
Does that imply motherhood itself does not reflect education?
We can make a case that it does, but what we do is our analytical sample restricts age by age for women starting at 25 to 40. And of course, there are women who continue, grad students. There are women who continue their education after 25, but we can make the case that we are observing completed years of schooling.
I mean, I wasn't thinking of continuing education. I was thinking there's a lot of literature which suggests education is related to fertility, completed education. That was what you...
That's an interesting question. We need to think about it. Because that's the propensity of becoming a mother or not, right?
Or at what age?
At what age? I think with cross-sectional data, we can observe those differences when looking at the size of penalties by age of the youngest child. When the child is in these samples, for instance, we see actually larger penalties for women with older kids, which only makes sense when we think about this as a cumulative process, a penalty accumulating over the years. Someone, yeah.
It seems to me your work starts after motherhood, but this seems to be correlated with the life before. Like, were they working before? Did they have regular jobs or no jobs? I mean, there must be at least, 25 or so when they marry and have children. So, what were they doing before?
We can understand that.
Do you have any feeling about that? Like, it's strange to me that after you have children, you go into an informal sector to be abused, so to speak, right? Because basically you have no rights when you are in the informal sector. Anybody can abuse you.
In many contexts, it's a sorting mechanism. That's why what we try to. It's a sorting mechanism. People don't have that many other choices. If the good jobs require you to be there from 8 to 5 p.m., no exceptions, no changes, always. Many mothers are not able to do that. This is if you do exploratory analysis. I have done exploratory analysis. For instance, women who have no other women in the household, they are less likely to be in the informal sector. You have someone else who help you out keeping with the good job. Daughters who are older, even.
So like if you were in the formal sector.
Yeah, so let's try to give clarification questions very short and make sure that we...
Sorry about that.
No, you're good.
So these are our hypotheses coming from our research questions. We expected a motherhood penalty for all these countries. We expected that mothers would be more likely to work in the informal sector compared to childless women. And we also expected that the penalty was explained, at least in part, by the sorting into the informal sector. And because we said these countries are different in important matters, we analyzed these samples independently. Independent analysis. I will be happy to discuss data sources with anyone who's interested. I try to pick the more representative data sources for each country. These are all conducted by national census bureaus. They are different, so there was a harmonization process, and anyone who's curious, I would be happy to talk about it. The key dependent variable is logged hourly earnings from the main job. For all these sources of information, I was able to add up different types of compensation from the main job, so tips, bonuses, etc., only for the main job. The key independent variable is motherhood, measured here with the presence of children 0 to 18, but results are actually very consistent if you operationalize this in different ways. And informality, I mentioned there are many definitions, and I picked this one that it is very much present in the literature, and I think it taps more substantially into what we care about, and is whether the worker is affiliated to a contributory pension system which gives her the right to receive a pension when retired. It's used by many scholars. There are other definitions though with pros and cons. The analytical sample I mentioned is women 25 to 40, trying to avoid women who could have children that are out of the household. In urban areas, household heads or partners. We exclude zero-income workers and the self-employed. I will be happy to talk about this. This is one limitation of the study, and I will be happy to talk about it in the Q&A. It's just hard to conceptualize the penalty thinking of the self-employed. In order to estimate motherhood wage penalty with cross-sectional data, to my understanding, this is what we are doing. We are implementing a two-stage Heckman equation. As you may remember, the first stage is about predicting employment with a selection model. The two differentiating factors, variables that we have here for the selection model are presence of a female relative in the household, an adult, who we believe is plausibly associated with employment but not wages, and household income in the household after subtracting earnings of the women. Luego, sorry.
Hold on.
Then we predict working in the informal sector with a logic equation. All the analyses are conducted including the Heckman adjustment, which behaves in the way expected, I would say. And third, we were interested on investigating whether informal labor indeed plays a role at explaining motherhood penalties. And what we do is we add a measure for informality to the first equation. So this is the first equation. We just added a term for informality. And then we compare our coefficient for mother across models 1 and 3 with our required chi-square test. So let's see results. In our first Heckman selection models, this is our first research question. We see a penalty ranging from 12% to 21%, 12% in Brazil, 21% in Chile. So this is a range. We see variation, right? This is not exactly the same across countries, but it's less variation than for other regions. So specifically for Europe, Joya Misra and Butik, they identify penalties ranging from 0 to 30% using a very similar approach. For models predicting work in informal sector, we see this consistent pattern with the only exception for Chile. So for all countries included in analysis, we find that indeed results suggesting that indeed being a mother pushes women into the informal sector. For all countries of Chile, though, this coefficient is only marginally significant and it's not trustworthy. But for all other countries, this is a consistent picture across different specifications that we tracked. And finally, we said we were going to compare our equation 1 without informality with our equation 2 with informality. So this is a model, this is a column that we have seen already. And this second column only adds informal work. And then we report the change in coefficients and whether this difference between the first coefficient for mother and the second coefficient of mother is significant or not. And what we find there is that for Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, and Peru, there is a difference. It is statistically significant, although for Brazil, it's a small difference, and we have a very large sample size. So that's a point into consideration. However, for Argentina, Mexico, and Peru, we have a substantial difference between these two models. It's about, my notes. Yeah, we report the percentage change and the statistical difference. So we see a large variation here, yes, in the weight of labor informality for explaining these motherhood pay gaps. For Peru, it explains about 14%. For Mexico, about 22%. The difference between Model 1 and Model 2. And for Argentina, it's a way larger difference.
Here, wages is your dependent variable?
Yes. Yes. So it's a first model, a wage model, and the second one is with informality.
So basically, you're showing that the motherhood penalty gets reduced once you add informal worker.
Exactly. Exactly. But the size of this reduction is drastically different. So that's something in the study that I needed to wrestle with, because our first set of results, we see difference, but not that drastic. No, here we see important differences in the salience of important informal labor for adding to the motherhood penalty.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of information. The Chilean case is very interesting because it barely changes.
And it's not significant. And this is actually consistent with our results that for Chile, we found that our results do not suggest that mothers are pushed towards informal labor. Right? That was the only country for which we didn't see a significant coefficient. So, the case of Argentina, sorry.
Argentina is always a little strange.
Well, I'm Peruvian. I used to think that Peru is very strange, but I thought a lot about results for Argentina. And we can talk about this later. I tried. We were talking at the beginning how we are trying an analysis tapping into the total effect of motherhood without taking into account extra mechanisms in the middle. No. And here we present analyses that are a little bit closer to a net penalty, but not a net penalty because we don't have total work experience. Results are consistent. I'm happy to talk about it. There's a lot of harmonization there because measures for all these variables differ across countries, but it was a little bit of an exercise. We can talk about this in the Q&A if anyone is interested. So we find the strong penalties ranging from 12% in Brazil to 21% in Chile in the first set of models. And this is a set of countries that differ substantially. So for this set of countries that differ substantially, we do find a penalty gap affecting mothers.